It's 5 minutes with me.
Hey friends, Marko here. So I was at summer camp with about 150 junior hires, and while there were multiple churches involved, my church was the biggest chunk, and I was in charge of the program. On day 2 of the 6-day camp, a couple kids and one adult leader got sick and had to be moved to cots in a nurse's station. It was not pretty, vomiting and diarrhea, but it was pretty limited, and camp proceeded as planned. On the 3rd day of camp, the number of sick campers and counselors went from 3 to about 30. The camp nurses suite was overwhelmed, and we started to question if we had a serious crisis on our hands. I very specifically remember asking myself this question when, during a chapel session with our speaker in the middle of his talk, we had to pause a second time because another camper had vomited on the tile floor, creating momentary but complete chaos. On the 4th day, the wheels came off and we completely lost control. Approximately 130 of our 150 were stricken. We tried to have a time of worship, but were constantly, and I'm not exaggerating here, interrupted by someone puking or experiencing uncontrollable diarrhea. Sick kids barfed and lost control of their bowels in their bunks and all over the floors of their cabins. We had no idea who was in which cabin as kids randomly moved to whichever cabin has less puke and poop. By the way, if you're laughing as you hear this story, you are certainly a youth worker. This was the day before cell phones, and we had to sit in the camp office and call every single camper's parents, telling them that camp was ending early and that they needed to drive to the camp to pick up their teen. Camp had to bring in professional cleaners in hazmat suits to disinfect the entire place. At that camp that my leaders dubbed Puke Camp and talked about for years, I had no choice but to acknowledge that I had lost control. But on most days, I'm a bit blind to my attempts at control. My default mode, when I'm not practicing self-discipline and mindfulness, when I'm not choosing to be aware of God's Spirit, has me settling into a tacit belief that I am the master of my own destiny. Even worse, most of my ministry practice and thinking, if I'm being honest, is floating along on a lazy river of believing that I am the master of other people's destinies. I realize as I type that just how ridiculous it all sounds. Feel free to scoff at me and continue lying to yourself that you'd never adopt such a silly mindset. In the coaching work I do with church youth workers, we spend quite a bit of time over the span of a year learning to identify and interact with our own voices of judgment, cynicism, and fear. The simple observational math is that about 80 to 90% of youth workers wrestle with the last of those, the voice of fear that runs like a silent operating system in the background of our minds. That fear, or more accurately, those fears, causes us to attempt control over and over and over again in the hopes that we can avoid whatever negative result we fear. But the idea that we can control our own destinies is a myth. And maybe even more true is that we cannot control the teenagers we work with. In youth ministry, I find that what we often attempt to control in our participants boils down to two things: beliefs and behaviors. We unthinkingly attempt to manipulate or coerce kids into conformity. And here's the scary thing. Many of us have developed finely tuned skill sets that appear to produce the results we're hoping for through manipulation and coercion. But it just doesn't stick. In fact, the majority of older teenagers and young adults who've walked away from the church and their faith would likely tell you, if they're self-aware enough to see this, that a primary reason for rejecting a once meaningful belief and behavior set is that they felt pressured into these things in a way that wasn't sustainable as they grew older. So we can't control the beliefs and behaviors of our children or teens, and we certainly can't control the Holy Spirit. So what can we control? Well, we can make daily decisions to trust, to release control. It's sort of paradoxical. We can control whether or not we hold on to control. Replace control with humility, faith, and the knowledge that Jesus is actively pursuing every teenager you know. And we're invited to join up with the work of Jesus already in progress.
Youth Cartel Podcast Network.